I want to talk now just a few words about the Constitution and strategy. Now I've talked about the internal workings of civil society. Since the days of TAC, many of our campaigns have been rear-guard strategies rather than forward-looking strategies. What was unique about TAC's mother-to-child transmission case was that we devised a plan for the government to treat people living with HIV. We haven't been doing that in recent years. We have to have a galvanizing vision that is capable of realization, underlined, capable of realization. As Naomi Klein has been saying in a recent book, no is not enough. No is not enough. We're masters of no. But we need to say after no, what is it that we want? Now, I confess to being a constitutional fundamentalist, if you like. And many people criticize me for it, and I criticize myself. But I think it's a vital framework. But I think that we've used it mainly defensively and reactively. We've used it extremely successfully against state capture. We have established as a matter of law that the Constitution is the supreme law. It governs political conduct, can be used to remove presidents, it can be used to fine presidents, etc., etc. And as a result, we've got many converts from business and so on. Everybody suddenly loves the Constitution. But we've taken a one-sided approach to the Constitution, I believe, which is we've ignored that not only should it have sway over political governance, it should also have sway over economic governance. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the next frontier. Economic policy is not the sole preserve of the executive, of the cabinet. If cabinet and the legislature pass a budget that takes away rights to health, takes away rights to basic education, that creates greater inequality, it has to be an unlawful budget. It has to be unconstitutional. Why is nobody saying it's unconstitutional, and why is nobody challenging it? Now, that doesn't mean that any government of South Africa is forced to a narrow socialist policy. But it means that any government of South Africa that works under this constitution has to take economic, fiscal, tax, etc. policy through the eye of the needle of social justice and of human rights and so on and so on. We are seeing the consequences of not doing so. Michael Kamapi's case is the price of not doing so. The Equal Education Norms and Standards case, they have a beautiful judgment from the Bishow High Court that norms and standards for school infrastructure are the law. But bugger all is happening as a result of that judgment, because it's said that there are no resources, because the resources have been eaten up by corruption, by mismanagement, by wasteful expenditure, etc., etc. We have to assert the primacy of the Constitution. And what I would challenge lawyers to answer me, and I'm not going to try and, but there are lawyers in the room, and I bet I'm right. I was reading, when I read this book outside, not the Dennis Davis book, about the al-Bashir case, when al-Bashir was taken out of the country, and how the courts said, well, if we signed the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, then we must arrest al-Bashir. We've subscribed to international law. Now tell me, if we've signed the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that requires us to use the maximum of all resources to realize rights, why do we do nothing about it? And why is it that when the Committee on Economic and Social Cultural Rights of the United Nations in December of last year issued a report that called on South Africa to revise its economic policy and to re-look at austerity, why is it that that report has been completely ignored by the government and by the cabinet? It may only be recommendations, but it requires a response. So that is a new frontier. And I'm not scoring points here. I want to read, this is the last point before I come to conclusions. The reason action and resolution on this issue is so vitally important is because ultimately the whole legitimacy of the constitutional enterprise depends on it. If transformation and equality cannot be achieved within the rule of law, what within the rule of law, then people can be forgiven for fighting for it outside of the rule of law, which is what is represented by the trend towards populism internationally. And when that happens, my True Confessions of an Errant Socialist will have to be retitled True Confessions of an Albino Terrorist, which is a title that Breitenbach gave to his book explaining why he fought the law and why he supported armed struggle to fight the law. Literally, the legitimacy of the law depends on this. Now, I've skipped a little bit, but I'm really at my conclusion, I promise, really. Last year, I want to just sum up. Last year, the great public historian, wonderful person, documentalist of social justice. If anybody's ever heard of a book called Bury the Chains about the struggle against slavery, fantastic, fantastic book, or King Leopold's Ghost about the Belgian Congo, published a new book called Lessons from a Dark Time. And at the very front of the book is this picture. And if you look at the picture, Adam Hochschild put it into the book because it's a symbol of hope, of resilience, of resistance, of justice eventually. But if you look carefully over his shoulder, there's JZ. And I noticed that, so I wrote to Adam Hochschild, and I said, you know that picture that you've used has got JZ behind Nelson Mandela, behind Madiba? And he said, no, he didn't know. He didn't know that. I said, well, it is. And then he said in his email to me, but anyway, one of the things that gives me faith in South Africa for the long run is the strength of its civil society institutions and the way so many of them are rooted in the popular movement against apartheid. Such a contrast to so many places around the world. Now, Hochschild's right. Civil society has many excellent parts, but it's not perfect. The problem is that it's still the sum of its parts. It's incoherent often. It's factional sometimes. In 2017, we began to work together against state capture as civil society. In 2018, we all went back into our silences again. In 2019, during this election, we were far too invisible. It was political party voices everybody heard, not the voices of the poor that were heard. So we have got to rethink. The terrain in 2019 is not the terrain when we started building the TAC, the ALP, Section 27, 15 and 20 years ago. It's changed in fundamental ways. The trade unions are broken and weakened terribly, for example. They were our allies. The churches, evangelical right-wing churches, dominate rather than progressive social justice aligned churches from the South African Council of Churches. There's no money in the bank. The Constitution doesn't scare the government in the way that it used to. And there are new geopolitical threats against civil society. I'm doing some work at the moment. You wouldn't know this, but in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado province, there are extrajudicial killings on a big scale going on against activists. In Zambia, there are extrajudicial killings taking place now. In Cabo Delgado, the police come to you and say, be careful or we'll take you to the woods. And people do get taken to the woods and they do get killed. This afternoon, yesterday night, Abahlali Base Mjondolo's office was broken into in Durban. Don't think that we are safe. But having said all of that, civil society has matured and grown. It's beginning to look more like the demographic of this country. It's younger, it's blacker, it's more female. One of the tasks now is for dinosaurs like me, and there's a few of us, to pass the baton to younger people. But as we pass the baton to younger people, we mustn't flee the field. We pass the baton and we stay behind a new leadership and we help to build that new leadership, and that's certainly my intention. I was going to say a little bit about the new challenges. I'm not, because I've really gone over time. But we have to begin mobilizing after this election from yesterday as civil society. We can't wait until Cyril Ramaphosa is dislodged. We can't wait until 2 years' time and state capture has regained a hold. We have to start now with an agenda for social justice. It disappoints me that Cyril's first meeting was with Goldman Sachs yesterday. It's not that he shouldn't meet Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs, an investment is important, but he also needs to meet the people, because the question of money is about the money that we need to get this country out of the desperate hole of inequality and indignity and failing health services and failing education services that we've got. But as we do that, we have to remember that no is not enough. So let me finish by saying I want to thank all of my comrades of the last 25 years. The struggle for social justice is tough and tearful, but at the end of the day, that's not what you remember. You remember the camaraderie, you remember the love, you remember the privilege of being part of forging a better world.